Morning, everybody. Thank you. And it's really very difficult for new trauma centers to open. It's really very hard to put all that together today. Most of the trauma centers you see have been there for quite a while. All of the trauma centers in Phoenix have been here for about 30 years. And the likelihood is that there won't be any new ones simply because of the impediments in terms of starting a new one. Yes?
So at what level of injury do you or your loved one have to be at to know that you should go to a trauma center?
Well, first of all, it shouldn't be up to you. In fact, you're not allowed to make the decision. If you get in a car crash or you get hurt or injured and you call 911, the medics will follow their protocols and take you to the closest trauma center if you meet their criteria. And unfortunately, if you're seriously injured, your preferences don't count. They won't, they won't take you further away just because of that. I mean, if you're between two and you have another family member that's going to one place, they might have some wiggle room. But generally, they have to take you to the closest appropriate facility. And if it's a serious injury, then they have to take you to the closest trauma center. Yes?
So for somebody to come to the trauma center, their injury or illness has to result from like an unforeseeable event? In other words, I've got this surgery and it's scheduled for 2 months from now. Is that something that I could...
That's an emergency, but that's not trauma. Trauma is an injury.
Okay.
It could be a car crash. It could be a fall. It could be a gunshot wound. It could be a stab wound. It could be an ATV crash. It could be a motorcycle crash. So it's an injury that results from some kind of, a force, either a penetrating force or a blunt force. But if you just have appendicitis, that's not trauma. That's just an emergency.
Our daughter's been in trauma twice.
Ooh.
Motorcycle accident. Yeah.
Does she wear a helmet?
Yes. There wasn't much left of it on the second one, but thankfully.
That makes all the difference, right?
But the first time they took her to Osborne, or I'm sorry, the first time they took her to Maricopa County because Osborne was full. So I thought that was interesting. So they bypassed it, but the second time they took her to Osborne. So I guess.
Well, that's one of the challenges to trauma centers.
Right. Okay. So how does that work?
Well, if a trauma center is full, if the emergency department's full, the trauma rooms are full, their resources are overextended, they can close to trauma. And what they do is they notify the dispatch, the Phoenix Fire, whatever their local dispatch is, that they're closed to trauma for the time being. Actually, trauma centers, one of the requirements for level 1 trauma centers is that they only be closed 5% of the time as a maximum. Because if you're closed more than that, the presumption is you're not doing what you need to do to stay open. So they really look to make sure that you don't close too much of the time to trauma. Sometimes it's unavoidable. You get 4, 5, 6 people in at one time. But you really do need to take whatever steps are necessary to stay open. And if you have somebody that's seriously injured on your doorstep and EMS responds, even if you're closed, they still have the right to bring the patient to you if they think it's necessary to save the life of that patient. So
what are the main differences between, say, a level 1 and a level 4 trauma center? Should I be biased against level 4 trauma centers?
The system tries to be inclusive. So what a level 4 center is any little community facility out in the middle of nowhere that recognizes that if somebody comes in that is seriously hurt, they need to get those patients stabilized as best possible and get them moved off to a trauma center. So they really don't have a lot of facility to take care of you there. So if you're in a large metropolitan area, you really want to be in a level 1 trauma center because they're the only ones that have all of the resources necessary to take care of all of the patients. If you're in a more rural community, then they very often can't afford the resources that are necessary to be a level 1 trauma center. And often the best they can be under the circumstances is a level 2 or a level 3. If there's nothing else around, that's fine. But the general recommendation is that if you have multiple levels of trauma centers in your area, then you should go to the highest level that's appropriate for the kind of injury you have. And that's the rule that the EMS goes by. They will take you to the closest appropriate trauma center depending upon what your injuries are. So the answer is you'd always prefer to have a level 1 trauma center close by if possible. Yes?
Would you keep a patient that came to a trauma center and then their condition stabilized? Would they stay at the trauma center until they we're better to go home, or once they're stabilized, they go to another hospital that's not a trauma center?
No, we take care of them until they're ready to go home or to go to rehab or wherever they're going to move on in terms of their care.
What's close to a trauma center? I mean, what's the definition of being near? Is it 1 hour? Is it 15 minutes?
Well, it depends on how you get transported. It's generally considered to be 30 minutes. I mean, if you're within 30 minutes, that's about the best you can do. And they're, in rural states that have a lot of rural areas, such as the western United States, the general consensus is that 30 minutes is really the geographic appropriate radius. Now, again, if you're flying, that can be a fairly long distance. So, you have to take into consideration whether you're being transported by ground ambulance or by helicopter, and they take that into consideration when they transport you to the closest appropriate center. So they will bypass other hospitals that are closer to take you to a trauma center as long as it's reasonable, depending upon what your injuries are and your condition is.
Do all of those 6 trauma level ones that you mentioned, do they all have air support? Or is that a...
They all have helicopter landing pads, yes. They don't have to have their own helicopters, but they do have to have landing pads for helicopters.
And it's the EMSs that decide which hospital they're going to? Or?
Yes, it's the helicopter company or the ground EMS agency that decides where they're going to take the patient. And they have their own triage guidelines that tell them where they should go based on where the injury is, how close they are from a trauma center, so forth and so on. What the mechanism of injury, how seriously injured the patient is. Okay, so let's go on. So I've said what the requirements are for the highest trauma center level. Who says you can be a trauma center? Well, any hospital, as I said, can be a trauma center if, depending upon the state you're in and depending upon the state laws and whether or not they have any restrictions, geographic restrictions or other restrictions on trauma centers. In the state of Arizona, if Paradise Valley Hospital just says, we want to be a trauma center, and they put together everything that they need, and they're able to meet the verification standards of the American College of Surgeons, then the state of Arizona will designate them as a trauma center. So it really depends on if you want to meet those criteria. But in Arizona, it's the state of Arizona that says you are a trauma center. Now, what are the current challenges? Yes?
Don't you still have to meet like accreditation standards from like one of the accrediting bodies also? Well,
the body, again, the accreditation is really what is the equivalent of verification, because that's saying that you meet all of the written standards. Okay. So if you meet all of those written standards, then you can be verified. Okay. And then the state takes that information and says, you are verified, therefore we are willing to designate you.
So they deem you status based upon that?
So that
they deem you status based upon the accreditation?
They deem you designated based on the verification. We actually don't use the term accreditation.
Okay.
We're not accredited by anybody. We're designated and verified.
Okay. So, because I know enough about the medical field to be dangerous. I know there's accredited bodies, JCO and so forth, so on. So there's no...
The hospital has the same requirements as every other hospital in terms of accreditation. So they may be accredited by JCO. In the state of Arizona, you're not required to be accredited by JCO. There are other mechanisms to get accredited. But that's for the hospital as a whole. Okay. So what are some of the challenges to trauma centers? First of all, there's obvious financial challenges. And the first is the high readiness costs. And those readiness costs are having all of those team members that take care of trauma patients standing by and ready to take care of a patient whenever they come in. Okay? So we have people working holidays and weekends and every day of the year, and that costs money. I mean, I get paid to be on call in the hospital 24 hours a day. We can't leave and go home. And we have to do the same thing for the neurosurgeons and the orthopedic surgeons and the plastic surgeons and everybody else. So there's a huge, and all of the personnel that the hospital have that are there really to take care of a patient at any point in time, they have to pay for all that. So that readiness cost is millions of dollars a year to the hospital to be able to take care of patients at a moment's notice. And so that's a huge expense. In addition, as you can imagine, there's a high number of uninsured patients or underinsured patients, let me put it that way, patients whose reimbursement doesn't meet the high cost that it takes to take care of them.